Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. My name is Ben Wevel and today I'm going to be analysing and reviewing round 12 of the 2022 Formula 1 World Championship, the French Grand Prix. I can't believe that the season is more than halfway over already. The scrap for the inaugural victory of the season between Max and Charles certainly does not feel like 4 months ago. But let's move on to the second half of this enticing season and to Paul Ricard, which hosted the French Grand Prix 17 times in the past. However, F1's illustrious history with France can be traced back far longer than Paul Ricard's first appearance on the calendar in 1971. The first French Grand Prix occurring in 1906 at the Le Mans circuit, having been won by Hungary's Ferenc Ziz. Difficult one to say there. The French Grand Prix was also part of the inaugural Formula 1 World Championship, its first home the Reims circuit in the Champagne region, which alternated races with the Rouen circuit until 1965, when the Circuit de Charade, which would make only 4 appearances on the calendar, was also used. The Grand Prix would then jump between Paul Ricard and the Dijon circuit from 1973 until 1990, after which it would finally find a permanent home at the infamous Monegasque, where in its 18 races on the calendar was won 10 times by a German driver. Interestingly, despite 10 of these 18 wins at Monegasque going to Germans, with 8 of these 10 going to the most decorated driver in France, Michael Schumacher, a German driver has never won in France apart from at Monegasque. This is probably thanks to the Grand Prix taking a hiatus from the calendar from 2009 to 2017, cutting out the peaks in the careers of both Nico Rosberg and Sebastian Vettel. Max Verstappen won the Grand Prix last year and will certainly be looking to repeat this feat in order to balance out his comparatively poor last few weekends. You can listen to the podcast on the streaming platform of your choice, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, all of which are linked below. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 66. Let's start off by talking about Mercedes, who brought major upgrades this weekend, including a revised front wing duct, as well as revisions to the floor, as well as adding louve's to the brake duct, which was for the purpose of improving cooling. These changes are all in an attempt to catch up with the two giants up at the front, Ferrari and Red Bull. And if these 2 Friday practice sessions were anything to go by, these major changes seems to result in an improvement, with George Russell 4th in both Friday sessions and Nick De Vries, who replaced Lewis Hamilton for FP1, coming 9th, and Hamilton making the top 5 as well on his return on Friday afternoon. The only mistake of the day, a scrape to the underside of Russell's Mercedes at turn 11 as he went wide. However, Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, was unsatisfied with this consistency. The team having hoped to be in a winning position come Sunday, thanks to the combination of the upgrades and Paul Ricard's smooth surface. Toto complaining about the team's lack of pace in an interview with Sky F1, describing the performance in FP1 as underwhelming. The same consistency was present in FP3, with a 4-6 for the German team, but this is still not up to the expectations from the outfit coming into the weekend. A team who will definitely have been satisfied by the first few sessions were Ferrari. Charles Leclerc coming out on top in FP1 by a 10th, But Ferrari dealt an even greater hammer blow on Friday afternoon as Carlos Sainz was over half a second up on title rival Verstappen. The Dutch driver striking back though on Saturday morning, nearly 7/10 up on Charles Leclerc in FP3. Both Red Bull and Ferrari implemented major upgrades in France, with a revised floor for Ferrari and the same for Red Bull. So it's clear that, with similar upgrades and similar dominance in practice, qualifying would be a mouth-watering affair. Next to Alpine, who, despite having won the first edition of the race all the way back in 1906, were looking somewhat out of sorts at their home Grand Prix in the opening practice sessions, with only Alonso reaching the top 10 in any of the three sessions to start the weekend, with 7th in FP3. This was despite Alpine also having brought some upgrades to their floor this weekend. Alpine have been, without a doubt, the surprise package so far this year, with huge consistency, the team only having gone pointless at one weekend so far this season at Imola. So I hope that we do not see a repeat of this lack of points, as Ocon and the team's home race is to come. Finally, I would like to talk about Haas, who planned this weekend to make it 3 double points finishes in a row for the first time in team history. However, despite their midfield rivals, including McLaren, AlphaTauri and Alpine, having made upgrades, Haas have stuck by their design, having added no major upgrades since Spain. They have, though, revealed that they will finally be bringing these updates in Hungary, so this weekend may be somewhat of a struggle for the team, with Kevin Magnussen's new internal combustion engine, which would relegate him to the back of the grid on Sunday, only rubbing salt in those wounds. And there could have been even more trouble for the Haas team on Friday afternoon, as Mick Schumacher had an almost fatal spin at turn 11, which could have left the team with quite the overnight repair job for FP3. Haas have really come into their own as of late, but this weekend may break their mid-season streak. Now on to qualifying, and it was Charles Leclerc who led in the opening session, a 10th up on the efforts of title rival Max Verstappen. But it was home hero Pierre Gasly who would miss out on Q2 in Le Castellet for the first time in his F1 career. Lance Stroll following, the Canadian never having got out of Q1 in France. Zhou Guanyu was 18th, with Schumacher being cruelly denied a place in the top 15 thanks to a very close track limits call at turn 3. This is the issue with drivers calling for consistency in terms of these track limits calls. Many more incidents are picked up on, and many more drivers fall foul of the rulings. Finally, it was Nicholas Latifi who would take last place, as is very often the case. Now on to Q2, and it was Ferrari and Sainz who would take the top spot. His efforts sadly futile, as the Spaniard would of course be relegated to the back of the grid as he took the new ICE prior to the weekend. And it was another home hero, Esteban Ocon, who would be left frustrated by his qualifying performance in 12th, the Frenchman citing that there was something fundamentally wrong with the Alpine car, while his teammate Alonso progressed on to Q2. Also out at the second time of asking were Ricciardo, Bottas, who had, before this weekend, never qualified outside of the top 3 in France, Sebastian Vettel, one of the 3 drivers on the current grid who remember racing at Manicourt, and Alex Albon, who has never scored a point at Le Castellet. Finally on to Q3, and it was number 16 Charles Leclerc who took his 16th pole position of his Formula 1 career, aided by a monstrous tow from his Ferrari teammate Carlos Sainz, who ended the day in P9 but would of course be demoted to the back of the grid. Finally, we have seen some positive strategy from Ferrari in qualifying after their dreadful first half of the 2022 season. And I personally was very optimistic about Charles's hopes on Sunday. Let's see if that came true. The Red Bulls followed with Max in P2, the top speed advantage which the Red Bulls have, of course, nullified by the utilisation of Carlos. The two Mercedes drivers were split by Lando Norris, who equalled his best qualifying in France from 2019 with 5th, while Mercedes could not quite crack their goal of top 3 in quali. Fernando Alonso, who won the Grand Prix in France back in 2005, took 7th place, which was in stark contrast to the frustration of his teammate, and Yuki Tsunoda took a very competent 8th place, his best qualifying finish since Miami. Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10. Now, onto my driver of qualifying, and I have to hand it to Lando Norris. The Brit once again had the upper hand on teammate Ricciardo, who managed a comparatively positive P11, splitting the two Mercedes drivers in fine style. Lando always extracts the most out of his McLaren, and to be less than 3/4 of a second off Red Bull's Sergio Perez shows a big step forward from the very, very worrying Bahrain at the start of the season. Now for my team of qualifying, and it's got to be Ferrari. The teamwork on display from the two drivers was very impressive, and the tow from Carlos Sainz aided Charles Leclerc to an easy pole position, putting him in the prime spot to take victory on Sunday, as the majority of drivers who have won the Grand Prix in the last 3 editions have started from P1. Even though Carlos qualified only 9th and would start at the back of the grid after taking a new engine, the pace on display from the Spaniard in qualifying was very impressive, and he could certainly have been gunning for pole, so a very confident Saturday for the Scuderia in general. Finally, for my struggle of qualifying, and despite Esteban Ocon complaining more about his car in quali, it was the other Frenchman, Pierre Gasly, who would be left scratching his head at his qualifying performance once more in P16. This season is just really not going the way of Gasly, with only 3 points finishes to his name and a plethora of poor qualifying performances, which, as I've said multiple times, were his great strong suit last season and the season before. But not only has Gasly been beaten by his teammate for the 4th time, but Yuki managed a very respectable P8. I just don't know what's happened to Pierre this season. This weekend, his home Grand Prix should have been the motivation that he needed to improve, but he just hasn't. Keep listening to hear if Sunday was a better day. Now onto the race, and it was of course Max Verstappen who took his 27th victory in Formula 1 and his 7th this season. The Dutchman is truly running away with the championship this season, and is now 63 points ahead of closest rival Charles Leclerc. But it was the Monegasque who started from pole who looked to be in control in the opening stages, weathering the storm created by Max Verstappen in the opening 15 laps, and opening up a very healthy gap thanks to his effective tyre preservation. Max, on the other hand, had blitzed his tyres in an attempt to surpass Leclerc, and was forced to pit on lap 16, coming out behind Lando Norris, and then passing the Brit 2 laps later. The race was shaping up to be a really enticing battle for victory between the front two, something reminiscent of the first few rounds of the season, but tragedy for me, a 4-year Charles Leclerc fan, would strike on lap 19, as the Monegasque spun out of the race and into the barriers at turn 11. Charles was distraught, an ear-splitting "No!" resigning Ferrari fans to the realisation that this is just not our year.